Thank you all for joining us for our webinar today about cyber liability. My name is Emily Reller, and I'm RJF's event specialist. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to go over just a couple housekeeping items. If you have questions during the presentation, please use the chat or question feature in the GoToMeeting toolbar. We will have everybody muted so that there's no background noise interference. We'll do our best to address as many questions as possible, but if for whatever reason we're unable to address your specific question, we'll be sure to follow up with you after the webinar. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Dan Hansen. He's the director of our Management Liability Group and our resident cyber liability expert. If you want to know about cyber liability, he's the man you want to talk to. With that, I'll turn it over to Dan.
Thanks, Emily. That was quite an introduction. Makes me sound like a lot of fun. I am going to go through several things today. This presentation should take 30 to 40 minutes, so we will start on it right now. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get my slides to advance here. What we're going to try to cover in this time period is what is a data security breach? What do we mean when we say we've suffered a data security breach? We're going to talk about how it may happen to your organization. We're going to talk about the legal and financial consequences, and finally, some ideas on how to manage that risk. So first off, what is a data security breach? I think we all hear about or have heard about some of the high-profile breaches that have taken place here in the last year or so. Yahoo had a huge breach in 2012 where 450,000 usernames and passwords were stolen and posted onto the web. Or Global Payments, which is a large credit card processor, 1.5 million credit cards, numbers, and PINs were taken. We don't have final resolution on this case, but it's far in excess of 85 million to date on what occurred there. And then also Twitter. I think this came out over the Super Bowl weekend, but 250,000 records were compromised within Twitter, and that obviously quickly made the front page of the paper. There's also several less high-profile cases or high-profile cases that are taking place on Main Street businesses or on businesses all across the U.S. The industries we most often hear about that are prone to a data breach would be healthcare, financial, and retail industries. And if I haven't said it already, a data breach is we as an organization or we as individuals, but mainly from an organizational standpoint, we have an obligation to protect the confidential information of others. It could be healthcare records, it could be financial records, it could be credit cards, it could be driver's license, social security numbers. We have an obligation to protect that information. And if we fail, if we fail in that obligation, it's considered a data breach. And we have an obligation maybe to notify, and also we're subject to any financial damages or could be open to suit for any financial damages that person or those individuals incurred or that business incurred because of our failure to protect that data. Okay? So you think about these three industries: healthcare with the amount of health data they hold, financial institutions, banks, insurance agencies, insurance companies, the amount of information they hold on individuals, or retail with the amount of credit cards they run or potentially driver's license numbers, social security numbers they hold. Those are likely places where people can go and get a large amount of data very quickly. So those are quite often three industries that are subject to a breach. But any business really is open or has a potential for a breach. I saw a presentation here. This is a little dated, but I saw a presentation here in the last couple of years where they showed a picture of a lemonade stand and they showed a picture of a horse-drawn carriage through Central Park. And I thought that was really telling. And what they said was these are two businesses that we can think of that are not do not have a data security exposure, do not have a cyber liability exposure. With the being they are all cash businesses and they have no employees. And really, that's one of the few ways you can get away with not having a data security exposure is to be all cash and to have no employees. Otherwise, you have an exposure. I went out this morning on a website called privacyrights.org. Everyone has access to it, and you can go out there and you can look at data breaches incurred since 2005. It's a chronology of all data breaches since 2005, and I just ran it on 2013. And to date, there's been 93 cases. And I was going to give a similar presentation yesterday. A snowstorm here in the cities didn't allow me to give that presentation, but I ran a similar listing on Monday of this week, and there's been like 5 or 6 cases posted since Monday. So there's activity every day from a data security standpoint. And it's not just the big three. It's not just financial. It's not just healthcare. It's not just retail. I thought was interesting, at least for the Minnesotans on the call, is the Minnesota DNR had a case here recently. And an employee of the DNR had looked at 5,000 different driver's license numbers. They don't think there was any malicious intent. They don't think there was, any nefarious activity that took place, but 5,000 people's information was compromised because of the Minnesota DNR's failure to protect that information. The employee was let go, but they're likely required to send notification to those individuals. One that I thought was kind of interesting was I assume this is a liquor store in Indiana called the Cork and Keg. And I'm assuming they had some driver's license numbers of individuals for maybe one of those kegs. And anyways, there was DePauw University noticed that a large portion of their students, or a portion of their students, had their data compromised, and it was traced back to the Cork and Keg. We don't know how many records were lost or potentially lost, but all those individuals were required to be notified, and any financial damages as a result would come from there. There was a small Haagen-Dazs in Florida. This happened it was reported on Valentine's Day this year, but they think that some criminals came in April of 2012 and put something on their cash register, allowing the criminals to view all the credit cards that were run on that cash register for nearly 2 years. And there was a large amount of data compromised. Again, we don't have the number there, but we have a huge amount of time where individuals who had gone to that store potentially could have had their information violated. And then the final one, when I thought this was interesting, is this a small Schneider Electric. I can't remember what state this is in, but this is at the beginning of February as well, where they were sending out a notification to certain clients and certain vendors, and the windows on their mailings were not lined up, and somehow they had Social Security numbers as part of that notification, and everyone was able to see those. So they had a huge data breach. Social Security numbers, and again, numbers were not available, but there was a fairly large suit involved there, a potential suit involved with Schneider Electric. So it's not just Twitter, it's not just Facebook, it's multiple small businesses or Main Street businesses that have this exposure and a potential exposure. I just want to point to one other thing here. There was an article that was conducted here very recently by Protiviti and the North Carolina State University's Enterprise Risk Management Initiative, and it polled 200 executives on what their concern was for the top risks in 2013. And of the listing of their top 10 concerns for their business, I mean, this could be macroeconomic issues, it could be the international economy, it could be a number of different things. 3 of the top 10 center on what we're going to talk about today. First was regulatory changes and heightened regulatory scrutiny, effect on how their products or services may be produced or delivered. And there's all kinds of new regulatory laws and changes around the cyber liability space, so that clearly falls into that bucket. Cyber threats made the list, and ensuring privacy, identity management, and information security system protection made the list. So 3 of the top 10 concerns for 200 executives of the top organizations in the world were made our list of cybersecurity concerns. Also, I just want to mention, I've ended up giving this talk 6 or 7 times to different groups. And every time I've given this talk, I challenge myself to go to the paper that morning and see if I can find something around cybersecurity, cyber attacks, something like that, just to kind of refresh and let people know this is happening every day and all over the world. And today, it took me about 10 seconds. I went to the Star Trib. If you look on page A4 of today's Star Trib, there's an article that says, report chastises Pentagon for inability to ward off cyber attacks. So we're talking about the Pentagon, okay? And I'm just going to read you just a few quick little snippets here from the article, but they said that one of the things they put in the report, it was a 139-page or 38-page report, was that they recommended potentially using nuclear strike as a deterrent to a major cyber attack. So they think it's that real, it's that big of a weapon that could be used against the U.S. It was quoted to say the Defense Department is not prepared to defend against the threat. They said the cyber defense has the abilities to have relative ease is interrupting or completely beating our forces and exercising use exploited software available on the internet. they said the task force concluded that protecting every military system from cyber threats is not feasible. So we're not talking about Main Street business here. We're not even talking about the Fortune 500. We're talking about the Pentagon feels that this is such a real threat and such an available threat that there's not, it's not something that can be, I mean, it's not if, it's when. And I'm not trying to be all doom and gloom here, but there's real potential there, and there's really, it's nearly indefensible right now. I mean, there's obviously measures we can take, but everyone has this exposure and everyone has this potential exposure regardless of size, sophistication, level of security, et cetera. So let's think about your business now. We're not the Pentagon. I don't think the Pentagon's on the call here at least, but let's think about what exposure does your business have the exposure. So I'm just going to ask you some questions. Do you store confidential information in your network? Example would be Social Security numbers, birth dates, employee evaluation, credit card numbers, health records. Okay. Do you utilize laptops, smartphones, or other portable devices within your business? Do you have a wireless network? Do you receive, transmit sensitive information from or to vendors or other third parties? Do you process credit card transactions? And then, are your employees able to communicate outside your organization? Do you allow them to use Facebook during the day? Do they, are they on Twitter? Are they on different vehicles outside? Or do you allow them to check their bank accounts and things like that? I assume, without getting the show of hands here, that we've probably had yes to most of those questions, and that's not unique. That's the nature of today's business. And I just want to back up here for a second. I'm not just talking about electronic information we hold on others. It can be in a filing cabinet. It can be on somebody's desk. It can be anywhere. It's information that we have on other people that we have the obligation to protect. Okay. So once we have this information, how is it stolen? Hacking and wireless snooping is a way of taking information. Malware, like we talked about the Haagen-Dazs, back the keystroke logging was the case there, where they were able to get a hold of people's financial information by having a system in place and able to record the keystrokes that were logged in regards to credit cards. Phishing and fraudulent websites, human error, loss of devices like a laptop or a thumb drive, that still accounts for 39% of all data breaches. It's just losing a laptop in a airport or getting your PA stolen at a restaurant. Misconfiguration of systems, incorrect dumping of records, again, by humans. Like I think we've all heard of the cases of pill bottles being thrown in the dumpster, or the law firm going out and throwing old files in a dumpster, or there was a school district here recently in Texas that had student records that they threw away, and a TV station happened upon them, so they got in quite a bit of trouble before they even knew they had the issue. Another way things are stolen is dishonest employees or vendors, taking that sensitive data and transferring it outside of bounds, or stealing of hardware and paper records as they leave a business because you're getting fired or taking a new job. Just to give you a few statistics around this, how things are taken, 98% stem from external agents, people outside the business. 4% implicated internal employees, and this is according to the Verizon 2012 Data Breach Investigations Report. And just incidentally, I have several websites listed at the back of this program, so we'll hold that slide up there for a little while, but there's some good websites. There's all kinds of good websites with a lot of data to give you an idea of where claims are coming from, how they're coming, and the type of businesses that are seeing these claims. How are they accessing this data? 81% utilize some sort of hacking, 69% incorporated malware, 10% involved physical attacks, 7% employed social tactics, and 5% resulted from privilege misuse. These four statistics here, I think, are especially telling. 79% of victims were target of opportunity. It wasn't Tom Cruise hanging from his ankles in a multi-lock computer facility. It was somebody leaving their password stuck to their monitor, or not their password being 1, 2, 3, 4. Easy access to the information, so they took it. which goes on to the next point. 96% of attacks were not deemed highly difficult. Again, this is by the Verizon 2012 Data Breach Investigation Report. 85% of breaches took weeks or more to discover. Think again about that Haagen-Dazs example. From April of 2012 until February of 2013, we had people running their cards, and unbeknownst to the business owner and unbeknownst to those people, they potentially were being violated. Okay? And 92% of incidents were discovered by a third party. Let's think about the cork and keg. It wasn't the cork and keg that realized they had the issue. It wasn't the individuals whose cards were taken. It was DePauw University who ultimately made that discovery. So what happens then is you lose the control, obviously, when that third party discovers it. When Visa comes and tells you that your grocery store has been violated, and they've got the trend, it's been going on for a while, and they've taken a while to isolate this, and it's in their hands, and they're working the claim now. Again, what data is most exposed? And we've covered this somewhat already, but I'm just going to kind of refresh us here. Confidential client and employee information. And don't just think about employee records, or don't just think about client credit card numbers or Social Security numbers. Think about the business plans that you might hold on a client, or the financial records you may have, or the potential expansion if a marketing firm is set to launch the new target ad or whatever. All that information, if it leaks out, can cause financial harm to others, and you, as a business, have an obligation to protect that. So don't just limit yourself to Social Security numbers, passports, credit card numbers. It's all confidential information that could create an exposure to your clients or your employees. Personal identification information, which I've already talked about, Social Security and driver's license numbers, credit card and financial account numbers. All those things are data that we as an organization have an obligation to protect. When this information is stolen, I think it's important to know how is it used. The theft of the data, the identity or money, it's used to gain some sort of financial advantage. Or it may be used to conduct criminal activity under, if you're going to do online, some sort of marketing or some sort of online theft, you could use, my information, Dan Hansen, and I could go in and I'd be the one who would get in trouble from the law. So it gives them a buffer for their illegal activities. Or we've also seen cases with extortion, where unless you give us $1 billion, we're going to release the 250,000 records that we have, from Sony or whatever it may be. So extortion. What are the legal consequences of a breach to your organization? And I'm going to go through these in a little bit more detail, but notification and remediation laws, which I'm going to talk about in more detail again, claims by clients, business partners, or employees as an individual basis, or potentially class action. So what are the notification and remediation laws we talk about? There's really a patchwork of laws across 47 states or D.C. or New York City that tell us if we think a breach has occurred, what we need to do. And half the battle at times is understanding what those laws say and what they do. I can tell you the laws define, or the law that responds is the jurisdiction of origin for the individual whose data was compromised. So if I'm from Arizona and I'm traveling through Minnesota or Wisconsin, and I use my credit card at a gas station, and that gas station is hacked, that gas station has an obligation to respond to me by the law of Arizona, not by the law of Wisconsin or Minnesota. So there's an extensive set of laws. I don't claim to know them all. Very few people do, but that's a big obstacle. There's not a federal or a set law across the U.S. right now on this. It's all over by jurisdiction. Fines and penalties by jurisdiction as well can accumulate, and then in many jurisdictions, the remedies include the plaintiff's attorney fees. So all those things can come against you organizationally. Claims, the third-party claims, are claims by clients, customers, employees. They're going to probably allege negligence, invasion of privacy, breach of fiduciary duty against you or your organization. So those are the type of claims you'll see from those folks. And then obviously you're going to have a third-party component, or I'm sorry, a class component there too. If there's an activity within your business and there's been multiple parties affected, you're going to see some sort of class action suit probably pretty quickly that'll escalate potential damages and such against your organization. The financial consequences, we've touched on this a little bit, but there's really two components: the first-party loss and then third-party liability to your organization. And I'm going to go through this in a little bit more detail because this is somewhat unique, at least in my world that I work with from a risk management standpoint. We spend a lot of time worrying about the third-party losses that an organization could incur, but we don't spend as much time on the first-party piece, and that's really important when we talk about cyber liability or network security coverage. So what kind of first-party losses, what kind of costs can your business have without even a suit from an outside third party, without even somebody saying, hey, you cost me financial damages? What kind of costs can you incur? You're going to incur the notification costs, like I said, in the 47 states and other jurisdictions where you're required to notify if you think there's been a breach. You're probably going to want to provide some sort of credit monitoring to those affected individuals. You're going to have some crisis management expenses, likely some public relations, maybe setting up a hotline, letting people know that things are back, we're okay, we're marching forward, and things are you can come back to our store. You're going to have some costs probably associated with computer forensics, data restoration. How did this happen? Why do we know it won't happen again? Has everything been restored to its natural state before the event happened? Potentially some business income loss or extra expense if you need to shut down a system or hire a more elaborate system while you remediate the claim. Potentially the extortion payments we talked about, and then the reputational harm that it could cause your business. And let me just give you just some numbers here. Panama does a survey every year, and the last survey they completed was for 2011, and it came out in March of 2012, so we should be seeing a new survey here very soon. But they figure per record compromised, it costs the business $194 per record compromised, okay? And of that, 135 is indirect costs, so churning of clients, loss of future revenues, the soft dollars that your business will never see because of this cyber liability event. And the remainder, the $59, would be the notification, potentially credit monitoring, computer forensics, those type of things. So $194 per record. And I just want to say that that's actually gone down since they started this study, which I think was like in 2004. That it had been trending up year over year over year, and this is the first year it's gone down. It went from 214 down to 194. And I think probably more interesting is that like retail businesses, public businesses, they're on the low end of the spectrum now for cost per record. I think people just almost expect that's going to happen. Financial institutions are still on the high end of the scale for a cost per record compromised, but retail, it's still like $135 per record, so it's not it's still expensive, but not as high as it once was. And while I'm on that note, going back to the Pentagon article we talked about, two things struck me about that article: the gravity of what they said was potentially could happen, and then number two, it was on page 4 of the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. There was a lot of things that people thought were more important or more newsworthy than the fact that we thought our entire defense system could be taken down very easily by cyber terrorists. So I think it shows that people are becoming more immune to the fear of having their information taken. I'm not saying that that's a good thing, but it seems like there's fewer people that the reputational harm piece has gone down. Not enough, but it's gone down. So third-party liability, what type of expenses can we see if we do have a claim for financial damage against our organization? Obviously, defense fees and expenses, defending what happened, why, what we did wrong, the damage that can ultimately come in. Plaintiff's attorney fees and expenses, we mentioned in many jurisdictions, that becomes responsibility of the organization, and then any potential punitive damages. fines and penalties or whatever that, if they're allowable, or I should say they're going to be a cost to the organization. At times, insurance may pick that up, but fines and penalties against your organization, again, from one of these many jurisdictions that that can govern the event. So let's talk about risk management for this situation. I'm going to just give you 3 things we're going to focus on here, maybe 4. Identify and assess the risk. Then we'll talk about how to maybe potentially reduce the risk, and then ultimately how can we transfer this risk from your organization. So again, let's just think back, and now we've boiled this down to 3 questions. What types of sensitive data does your organization store, send, or receive? Is it credit card numbers? Is it building plans? Is it marketing information? What types of sensitive data does your organization store, send, or receive? How vulnerable is that data to a security breach? Do we all have access to it, to just certain individuals? And when certain individuals have it, where is it kept? And what would be the potential severity of loss or liability in the event of a breach? Do we have the formula for Coke? Or do we have, Dan's credit card number, which isn't going to get you a whole lot? What is our severity of loss or liability in the event of a breach? And then let's think about what are some common vulnerabilities that our organization could have. How vulnerable are we? And I'm just going to kind of roll through some things that we see quite often as we go into business. And I'm not a cybersecurity expert, but we do end up having this conversation with a lot of folks. So these are some things that we see quite commonly in businesses of many different sizes. So flaws in the custom web application code, it's ubiquitous. It's all over. Attackers can circumvent controls. They can get around the backend system. We got a really good control up front, but once we get past that, once we sit down at someone's desk, we can get through everything. Lack of security process or standards. Password configuration. That's an easy one, but it's something you see quite often. Passwords are, everybody has the same password, 1, 2, 3, 4, or it's there's no standards there. There's no capitalization requirement or symbol requirement or alphanumerical requirement. It's all one, and it's easy to guess. Everyone figures it's your firstborn child. Poor patching processes. We don't update our software on a regular basis. Or just weak security awareness training for your employees. People are the weakest link in this. If they don't understand that they are a target or a potential target for a cyber liability event, that's more than half the battle. So if somebody calls up with a phishing exercise and asks for their password, say, hey, I'm calling from Microsoft, we've got an issue here, I need your passwords in order to fix the issue on behalf of the company. I've talked to your IT expert, he said okay, or she said okay, and it's a phishing exercise, and they just give it up because they're not told never to give passwords outside of the organization or never to talk to anyone without IT being on the line or whatever it may be. Those are all common vulnerabilities we see within businesses or organizations we talk to. So what can we do to reduce the risk? And this is where we do spend a lot of time on. What reasonable measures can you implement to reduce the likelihood and severity of a data security breach? Can we update those passwords? Can we limit the number of people who have access to sensitive records within our business without dramatically slowing down productivity? Do these measures exceed the standard of care for data security expected in a business such as yours? If you're in retail and you're PCI compliant, that's an expectation of most retailers if you're using credit cards. So are you PCI compliant? Have you taken different standards or different tests, and have you shown that you meet or exceed your peers from a security standpoint? What educational steps can you take with your employees? Are you giving them access to webinars on data security? Are you letting them see things like the Verizon data security report if it's important to their job? What level of education do your employees have around this exposure? And then what can you do to ensure the compliance by vendors and other third parties? Do you ever ask to see, if you use cloud computing, do you ever ask to see their security processes or procedures? Do we know what they have in place to control this data? Or with their credit card processors? Those type of questions all serve to help organizations. Just an interesting statistic I ran across here recently. 41% of organizations that had a data security breach, the third-party fault was involved in that data security breach. So understanding your vendors and what they're doing is very important to protect your risk. And then going along with that reduction, do you have a crisis response plan in place if you do have a data security breach? Like I mentioned, the devil's really in the details once we think something's happened. What do we have in place? Do we have have we thought through what we're going to do? Do we know what we're going to do if we get that call on Friday night at 5 o'clock that somebody stole a tower out of our business? I encourage steps like, assessing the scope of breach and damage. Do we have technological fixes and forensics in place? Do we have anybody that we know that could come in and help us out? Who's our law firm or who's our crisis management firm to help us get through the notifications and remedial actions we might need to do? Do we know who to contact within local law enforcement or within the local government as to how to help us get back on track as soon as possible? It's better to engage them versus them engaging you. Public relations. Do we have an internal audit or internal investigation committee that can help get things set up and help with employee relations as if let's assume that employee records were compromised? And then again, what do we do to pursue maybe a third-party vendor or defend against legal claims? So we have some sort of process or procedure in place. And finally, we're going to talk about transferring the risk. How can we offset some of this risk to other parties or to insurance to help protect our organization? We spend a lot of time talking about indemnity agreements we have with vendors or clients. You really need to review that agreement and understand their security policies, their procedures, their plans. And then you want some clear risk transfer language in the indemnity agreement. Hold harmless wording. If it's my fault, it's my fault. If it's your fault, it's your fault, and you're required to indemnify and make me whole. And then you want, you can rely on their balance sheet. You also want to make sure they have an insurance policy in place to back that indemnity obligation. And then you want to think about, do I want to be an additional insured on that policy or not? Quite often, maybe not, because you don't want to have like an insured versus insured exclusion react. But you want to make sure that if that vendor or client has an activity that they're a breach that you could get drug in on, that their policy or their balance sheets can respond and you're going to be made whole as quickly as possible. Once you have that insurance policy, or they have that insurance policy in place, likely from a certificate of insurance, make sure it's on your list of things that you ask for every year. If you go back out and ask for, your certificate of insurance for autos or anything else you're asking from businesses, ask about that cyber liability policy. Make sure it's still in place and maintained, and make sure it has adequate limits to protect your exposure. And keep in mind that your exposure and other people's exposure will all fall into that same bucket. So keep in mind the size of the business and what type of insurance they should have in place. There is insurance you can purchase on your own business as well, and I'm just going to go through that fairly quickly here. I've probably used 3 or 4 different names for this line of insurance as I'm talking. That was somewhat by accident, but also it's somewhat true. It's a relatively new line of coverage. There's little standardization, so you might hear people talk about cyber liability, or network security, or data protection coverage. All these things can mean roughly the same thing as far as coverage. I'm going to throw them all in the same bucket today. It fills in a likely gap in traditional insurance. Your general liability is not going to likely cover this. Your crime policy is not going to cover this. Your D&O or your E&O policy. There's cyber network security exposures have been carved out of those policies. So this is why you would require a separate policy. The policy would typically include the 2 coverages we discussed earlier. The first-party exposures, that notification, credit monitoring, public relations, and the third-party exposure. So those would be built in or embedded in the policy. There's certain things you want to look for in every policy. I talked about this, but you have both an electronic and a non-electronic exposure to protecting data. You want to make sure that both of those are covered in the policy. Most policies do that today, but you'll still find one or two that don't have the non-electronic piece built in, and you want to make sure that's built into your policy. You want a broad definition of claim so that when an event occurs, even if there's not a third-party claim yet, but there's an event and it could potentially result in third-party claims, the policy starts reacting. You've got those first-party costs. You've got those, you can start mitigating the damage and potential damages for the third-party piece. You want to see that there's as much coverage for that, coverage for fines or penalties or punitive damages. Going back to the original concern of, the 200 executives, that regulatory piece, that's becoming bigger and bigger around that cyber liability front. So you want to make sure that you have coverage in there for the fines, penalties, and punitive damages that may result. Where allowable. Some states won't allow payment and all that, but where allowable, you want coverage. You want to talk about, understand your additional insured and insured contract endorsements. If you're required to provide cyber liability to some of your clients or vendors or whatever, you want to talk through with your insurance broker how the policy would respond to that. Is there blanket coverage? Do I need to list them all individually? Do I want to list them all individually? You want to understand how that policy is going to react. This is a claims-made policy. So you want to understand the notice provisions and claims reporting requirements. You want those as broad as possible so that you don't get a timing situation on a claim. You want to be able to turn it in. You should always turn in a claim or potential claim as soon as you know about it, but you want as much flexibility there as you can. Since this is a claims-made policy, prior acts coverage is maybe not covered in the policy, but you want that retroactive date or the date that the policy would start responding back as far as possible. You want to make sure there's full severability to exclusions for like dishonest, fraudulent acts, criminal activity, those type of things. And then as you understand your business, you want to look at that business interruption coverage, see if it's something that's available to you, and then what the cost would be, and understand how that's going to apply. Because business interruption, if you're a retailer that has a high amount of traffic, that with people running cars every day, it's something you most likely would want, and you want to understand the costs and then also the limitations or the deductibles that may apply there. Is the policy worth the premium? This is not my slide. I've given this talk, I think I mentioned a number of times, and I've given it with an attorney most times, and he takes this. But what he talks about, I'm going to talk about this without sounding too self-serving, is he talks about the advantages of having the policy. You've got the remediation costs, which talk about that first-party piece, that PR piece, and then you have the liability, so that you get the multiple value there. It's not just the defense for that claim that comes in. It's also the dollars to make that claim when it comes in as low and as painless as possible. The thing that I think is a huge advantage is it gives you a pre-existing plan. When you sign up for a policy, you sign up for 24/7 service. So when you do have that event on a Friday evening, you call the insurance carrier. The insurance carrier has vendors on call that they can use. They have law firms they can recommend. They've got all these different pieces in place so that they can get out in front of this matter as soon as possible and keep the damages low. The quicker typically you react on something like this, the less damages there are and the fewer claimants. So have that plan in place versus, okay, now what do we do? Have a meeting on Monday morning, push off to Wednesday. You lose weeks at a time. This gives you a go-to plan right now. The policy helps to keep pace with external changes. This is an ever-evolving line of insurance, but ever-evolving group of laws. So it helps keep up with those laws as far as in the past, the policy used to read that they would provide notification and credit monitoring where required by law. Well, really, credit monitoring wasn't required by many jurisdictions, if any. So while that seemed nice, there was no coverage there. The policy helps gives them dollars where they maybe wouldn't have had dollars before. So it keeps up with the pace of what's happening within the legal front on this thing. And also with many policies, you can get free expert assessments or risk reduction services along with the policy. So they will send out a loss control group, or they will have online resources available to you to review your own cybersecurity and your own potential for claim, your own potential losses, and that's all built into the policy. Now, clearly that benefits the insurer, but at the end of the day, it would benefit you as the organization as well. As I mentioned, this is the kind of wrapping up the formal part of the presentation here, but here's some websites that are available. You see the second one down is that Privacy Rights Clearinghouse, privacyrights.org, that we use quite a bit here within our organization to see what's going on. The fourth one down, the Ponemon Institute, that gives great data around the cost of breaches. The Verizon Business Risk Team, that's his 2008. It's just a 2012 data breach investigations report. That's a nice tool to see the type of activity or the type of hacking, malicious activity that's going on out there. But all these resources are available to you via the web. I am going to turn it back over to Emily now to see if there's any questions. I don't see any, but please help me out if there are.
Hi, Dan. I don't see any questions either, so I think you were pretty thorough. We can go ahead and wrap it up.
Okay. Thank you.